Hi everyone, this video is part 3 of the learning unit. In this video, I will cover the topics that involve social and observational learning. I kind of think of this as the catch-all part of the learning unit. The first two videos were over two really specific realms of learning and conditioning, classical conditioning and operant conditioning. And these are in this video, are other areas where humans and animals learn behavior, but is not related to classical or operant conditioning. So let's begin. The first slide we will cover is Edward Tolman and latent learning. So Edward Tolman found out that learning could exist even when the behaviors weren't exhibited. So what he did was he put rats in this maze. As you can see, there's a diagram of Tolman's maze. And he put the rats in the maze, and the rats made their way through the maze and, went around every turn. But he couldn't quite tell if the rats understood the pathway out of the maze. So he took the rats out of the maze. He placed an incentive at the end of the maze where you can see there's a food box at the end. So he placed food in the food box, and then he placed the rodents in the maze a second time, and the rodents made it through the maze quickly without error. And what he realized was learning had occurred when he put the animals in the maze the first time. He just could not tell that it had occurred. It was latent, meaning it was hidden, and it was in their minds, but they had no incentive to perform that behavior until food was put in that food box. So he called this latent learning, that learning is hidden or latent in their mind, that it's there, but they had no incentive to perform it. He said that they had created a kind of a cognitive map, that they understood it in their mind, but had no incentive to perform that behavior. The next slide covers motivation. Motivation is a reason why we perform a behavior. There can be different reasons why we perform that behavior. The reason could be intrinsic or extrinsic. An intrinsic reason would be performing that behavior because the behavior itself is rewarding and you just want to do that behavior for the behavior's sake, just for wanting to do that behavior. You just have an inward desire to do that behavior. An extrinsic motivation means there's some kind of external factor that is motivating you to perform that activity or to perform that behavior. So something outside of yourself and outside of the activity itself. So money, rewards, food. There might be all kinds of external factors that are motivating you to perform that behavior. The next slide covers another element of learning. Again, this is kind of a catch-all video of different types of learning that aren't necessarily related to operant or classical conditioning. This is what is referred to as learned helplessness. This was something that was discovered by Martin Seligman, and Martin Seligman discovered that animals could learn to behave helplessly. So what he did was he placed a dog in a box, and in this box you can see there is a shock generator on the floor, this grid that could generate a shock and could shock the dog. And he placed dogs in this box and they were trapped. They were restrained by a mechanism that would hold them on one side of the box. And they would receive a small shock. What he wanted to see though is after he put them in this aversive situation where they were receiving this painful shock, after he exposed the dogs to this, he then put them back in the box unrestrained. And he wanted to see if the dogs were shocked again, would they try to jump out of the box now that they're unrestrained? And he found that the dogs that were restrained previously and they were shocked while they were restrained in the box stayed unrestrained, meaning they could get out, but they had learned to remain helpless and felt like they could not because they had previously been restrained. The dogs that had not been restrained and had not had that experience escaped the shock and they wanted to get out of that aversive condition, whereas the dogs that were had experienced that situation where they were restrained and had to endure that shock, learn to behave helplessly. And they did not try to escape this situation. And so we say that learned helplessness can be applied in other areas, that after experiencing aversive conditions that seem difficult, that seem challenging, that you cannot get away from, that there is a situation where possibly when you can escape or you can get yourself out of that situation, you don't, because you have learned to behave helplessly. The next slide is about locus of control, internal and external locus of control. These are just concepts to explain what you are experiencing and how you interpret what you are experiencing. So if you have an external locus of control, you have the perception that where you are in life is out of your control. It is external. It is an external locus of control. It is outside of anything you can control. Where you are has been determined by factors that you have no control over, whether it be the environment or society. Where you are in life is outside of your control. An internal locus of control is where you have the perception that where you are and every element of who you are and where you are has been determined by you, and your behaviors and your performances and your hard work has got you where you are. You have an internal locus of control. On this slide, we will learn a little bit about something called observational learning. I think this is easy for students to guess on a test because it is what it sounds like. Learning through observation or learning through watching a model. So when someone performs a task, watching that model and then performing that task because you've seen it done by someone else. This was something studied by Albert Bandura, and in this clip, I will let you watch what he learned through his study. So he is actually the person who is talking in the background of this video, and he's explaining what's happening, but I'll give you a little bit of background. The child in this video, there's a boy and a girl, and they have observed an adult behave in the room filled with toys. And so Albert Bandura is wondering, will the child behave like the adult behaved? And if so, then we will say that they learned through observation.
The model pummeled the doll with a mallet, flung it in the air, kicked it repeatedly, threw it down and beat it. It was once widely believed that seeing others vent aggression would drain the viewer's aggressive drive. As you can see, exposure to aggressive modeling is hardly cathartic. Exposure to aggressive modeling increased attraction to guns, even though it was never modeled. Guns had less appeal to children who had no exposure to the aggressive modeling. The children also picked up the novel hostile language. The room contained varied play materials.
So what he was getting ready to say was there were many different items in the room that the children could play with, but they chose aggressive toys and they chose to play aggressively with that Bobo doll because that's what they had previously observed an adult do. And so what Albert Bandura concluded was that we learn through observation, which is called observational learning. So the next slide shows mirror neurons. Mirror neurons are neurons in the brain that activate when watching someone else perform a behavior. And they activate as if we ourselves were performing the behavior that we are observing. So you can see in this diagram, there's a monkey who is performing the action of eating the banana. There's a monkey observing another monkey eat a banana. And what's happening in the brain is there are neurons that are activating that are called mirror neurons that are activating as if we are like empathetically understanding and feeling and empathizing with that exact same behavior. So this is a link between trying to understand the emotional connection between someone who is observing someone else perform an action. It's as if we can connect with that person and our brain is activating as if we were performing that behavior ourselves. Finally, we have two different behaviors to make sure that we clarify. One is called prosocial. So this is a behavior that is performed that is considered a positive behavior. This is a helping type of behavior. So a prosocial behavior would be if someone is performing an action that is helpful to others. An antisocial behavior can be a little bit confusing because oftentimes students think of antisocial as someone being not outgoing, and that is not what antisocial means in psychology. This is a behavior that is unhelpful, that is hurtful to others, that is threatening. It is something that is unmannerly, it is unkind. So this is also going to relate later in the future when we learn about antisocial personality disorders, which it comes in a very similar fashion, behaviors that are hurtful to others and harmful. So antisocial does not mean that someone is not outgoing. It means that someone is performing behaviors that are not prosocial, that are not helpful behaviors. So this unit had this particular video had a conglomeration of all types of different behaviors related to learning and learning actions. It was just kind of a conglomeration of different types of behaviors. I hope this video was helpful. Please reach out if you have any questions.